the room before we came. And this handout is really cool. And it's an old one, but sometimes that's okay. All right, so let's look at this handout just for a minute, because this is one that will really help you when you look at change over time, which is one of the things that they really like you to do, especially if you're going to be writing an essay. So look at the progressive period, which is where we ended up last time, and we're going to start with this time, because you were getting tired and I was getting tired, and I don't even know if either of us made a whole lot of sense. So the progressive period. So we want to be very efficient today because it is Friday and everybody's tired and everybody'd like to go home, and probably Sean is probably still sick, so is Hayden. And oh, okay, so a lot of people are not feeling all that well. What's that? You gave them back to me.
Yeah.
And it was these two that were in the room with me. Okay, so let's walk through this, okay? You guys ready? Because I'm pretty much ready. It's Friday. Okay, so the progressive period. I want you to look at your chart. So what it does is it takes all of the progressive period, all of the, what we call later on, the Great Society programs, and it kind of talks about their roots. So if you remember correctly, the progressive period is right at the turn of the century. That's what you want to remember. And then you're going to look at the New Deal, which is obviously the Depression. And then you're going to be looking at the Great Society, which is the 1960s with Johnson. So look at the different programs and how one builds on the other. And what they did is they took, when they created this, I didn't create this, I just marked it up. When they took the ideas of it, what they did is they moved it. So for example, I'll take the monopolies. They break up the monopolies in the progressive period, the trust busting, remember, with TR. And then during the New Deal, they regulate utilities, which are like gas, oil, electric, which is similar to the monopolies of the progressive period. And then the last part of that, on that same sort of vein, they take the regulation of highway safety. That means in the Great Society, they regulated speed limits, for example. A little bit later in the Great Society, they insert like seat belts and things like that. So they're regulating different industries. So you want to see how one builds on the other. Obviously, highway safety was not a big deal during the progressives because there weren't that many cars. So when you look at it going across, you can see it builds on a more modern society. So you would be very smart to look at all these and see how they change over time, because again, this could be a very cool essay question. And many kids would not even know how to start, but you would. So look at this, kind of, get the idea of it. So if you've got a question like it, it would be a great way to answer it. Okay? Now, what I'm going to use, you guys, and if you have yours, the part of this handout that I really like is the part that we're doing right now. So I'm going to use this as sort of my guide as I'm talking a little bit through this. So if you have this handout, you can write all over it or whatever makes you happy. You little Megan, I will get you one if you would like one. You can have this one after I finish with it. Okay. So, are you? Oh, Kalea. And are you from Good Hill too?
No, I'm from Oxnard. I came here the past 2 years.
Oh. She just left her junior year. She didn't want to be with me. I understand.
I think you want to be.
You are now, aren't you? Okay, so those of you that are looking at this, I'm going to start with progressive, the progressives. Okay? And Megan, if you want to, do you have yours?
Yeah.
You could share with her? Okay. You have to sit next to Tavish. Oh, there isn't a seat there? Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's such a special place, isn't it? Yeah. You just heard her. All right. So let's go back on the progressive just for a moment. And if it's okay with you, I think what I'll do is I'll go through the Great Society, and then I'll end there, because we pretty much, that's like really recently, all the rest of the stuff. So I'm going to end with the Great Society. If you want to talk about something else, if you have a question, I will be glad to answer it after we finish that. I wanted to build in some extra time for those that have some questions. Those of you who don't have any questions or just want to get out of here, after we finish with the rest of it, you can go. If those that have some extra questions want to stay, you can certainly do that. Okay. All right. So, yeah. Yes, he is the Great Society, except when we look at, and that's a really good question. Her question, by the way, was, is Johnson considered the end of the Great Society? In some ways. In other ways, we know that, Nixon continued a lot of the same programs, like Medicaid, did some things with education, did some of the same programs and funded them, which is kind of odd because he was a Republican and Johnson was a Democrat. And that's what, remember, put that spending way up in the 1970s. They continued on with some of those programs. So he would be the one that, if you were ever asked something about, I don't know what kind of question it would be, but he introduces them, but a lot of them are still here, like Medicaid, Medicare, those kinds of things. Okay, all right, you guys ready? Yeah. All right, so, okay, Tavish, you can really sit in your seat. Have you had enough attention? Okay. All right. So the muckrakers are the ones that bring the problems to the service, but they don't have any solutions. And so the progressives are the ones that come up with the solutions. And I gave you examples last time, but I'm going to go through them again mainly because I want you to think about them and connect them to the rest of this stuff. Okay. The other half lives would be kind of a muckraker because Jacob Riis just exposes the problem of the tenements, but he doesn't solve them. Lincoln Stebbins, The Shame of the Cities, you can see it on here. If you've got your green sheet, you don't really have to take notes, you can just listen, and then when you go back, you can try to piece it together, unless you want to take notes, I don't really care. But some people have to take notes in order to really pay attention. Other people are better off not trying to keep up with. My little friend Casey, I don't think he's here today, it's Friday. Yes. Okay, so Ida Tarbell, History of Standard Oil. She is a muckraker. John Spargo, Bitter Cry of the Children, about coal mining. He is a muckraker. Upton Sinclair with The Jungle. You guys remember that? We talked about it last time. He is a muckraker because he just exposes the problems of the meatpacking, but he doesn't solve them. All right, so who are some of the progressives? We talked about them last time. Jane Addams with Hull House. And then there's Florence Kelly, who also has a settlement house in New York. Remember, Jane Addams was in Chicago, okay? Then Robert Lafayette, and I had to spell that for somebody a couple of times, talked about the initiative, referendum, and recall, the ideas of more activism in government. And this is when we have the secret ballot, okay? And this is going to be, and if you need a progressive during the politics time, the governor of California, Hiram Johnson, is a progressive. And when you think of the progressives and you think of California, it is the time when the railroads are dominating in California. This is the progressive period. So they are trying to get rid of the railroad monopoly. Okay, so what do we want to say as the amendments that are called the progressive amendments? Okay, 16, 17, 18, and 19 are all progressive. So let me go through them. 16 is income tax, and that's under Wilson. 17 is direct election of senators. Remember where Lafayette said it's ridiculous that the House of Representatives of that state should choose the senators. The people should choose the senators. 18, of course, is prohibition. 19 is women's suffrage. So those are really the progressives. If you want to count 21, 21 gets rid of 18. And 20 does what? The lame duck period, it moves it closer so that we don't have this big huge gap between the time someone is elected and the time they take the office. Goes it up from, that's 20. I don't know if that's really progressive. It's part of the kind of the depression period. Yeah. What's what? 15?
Yeah.
That's blacks' right to vote.
Okay, that's right.
Suffrage. I mean, that's 13, 14, and 15 are all Reconstruction or the Civil War amendments. Yes. Okay. And again, look at your book. Try to remember how some of these go. Like if I say 26, that's under Nixon when he gives 18-year-olds the right to vote. Now some of them, when you look at 24, that's poll tax, so that would go with Johnson. Think about what they go with. Like 26 would go with Nixon because he's in Vietnam. When you think of Johnson, he is the guy that tries with civil rights. So those are going to go with him. Okay? All right. Now, we want to remember, during the progressive period, the triangle shirtwaist fire. And the triangle shirtwaist fire is when people say, uh-oh, they locked all those poor girls in a factory. We need to do something about the factories and about safety in the factories. So the triangle shirtwaist fire is in New York City, and it is in 1911, which is right in the middle of the progressives. Okay? So you want to think, okay, this showed it very plainly that no one was following the rules. Okay. Now, women's suffrage in the progressive period is important. This is when you have people like Alice Paul. You have people like Carrie Catt. These are people that did not really get too much involved with the Seneca Falls in 1848 because they probably weren't alive. But they are going to take the feminist movement or the suffrage movement to the next level and get the right to vote. Now, what president signs that amendment? Wilson. Remember his wife? Just think, Wilson's wife had a lot to do with the presidency. So she would have wanted women to have the right to vote. Yeah, she may have been the first woman president. Okay, now, 18th Amendment, prohibition of alcohol is a direct idea of the progressives, in addition to the fact that we wanted to make the Germans pay. And the way we make the Germans pay is to keep their livelihood, which was beer making, and say, you know what, we have to send all that grain to the poor boys that are in World War I, so you can't be making your beer. So there's prohibition. So, women's prohibition, there was a Women's Christian Temperance Union, remember? Women's Christian Temperance Union. And that's with Frances Willard. Now remember, Emma Willard was the schooling. Frances is actually her sister, who is going to be part of the Temperance Union. And there's also the Anti-Saloon League. Now these are people that wanted to get rid of all of the bars, because remember, in these western towns, 2 out of the 3 buildings were bars. So who is the person that we want to remember with the Anti-Saloon League? She has a hatchet. Carrie Nation. Carrie Nation. You want to remember her. She is the symbol for the Anti-Saloon League. She would stand in the front of a saloon with her hatchet and say, I dare you to go into the saloon. She was formidable. Okay. All right, so if you hear the Volstead Act, you guys, listen to me. The Volstead Act is the same as the 18th Amendment. So if you hear Volstead Act, that means prohibition. So even though, and the difference being, is it's the Volstead Act first, and then they take it and they make it part of the Constitution. So it becomes an act before it becomes part of the permanent Constitution. Okay? All right. So let's talk about the presidents. And I think that's where I kind of ended on Wednesday before you all went into the ozone. All right. We want to remember that Theodore Roosevelt had the square deal, the 3 seats. And we took notes of this, but I want you to remember, I can't imagine you not having a number of questions about Theodore Roosevelt. If you don't, it's going to hurt my heart. Okay, so 3 seats. Conservation, consumerism, protection of the consumer, and protection from corporations. All right, so in my mind, the best thing you can do is give an example of each of those. So protection of the consumer is the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act, both of which are passed in like 1906 to protect the consumer from bad medicines and bad meat. You're going to do it, Ryan. So quick. It's all right. Okay, protection from corporations is going to be the trust buster. And the idea of busting up the trust. If I were to give another example of that, you guys, I would also use the anthracite full strike as my example for busting up trust. Because even though it's not exactly a formal trust, him going in and saying, you know what, we are going to, the strikers want better wages, they want better hours, and if you don't do something, owners, we're going to come in as the federal government and take it over, and you're going to lose everything. So this is the first strike, the anthracite full strike, that you want to remember. It is the first time in 1902 that the workers actually get something from a strike. They get better hours, and they get better working conditions. Okay, so the anthracite, and anthracite, by the way, is just a fancy name for a type of coal. It's not a place, it's not a person, it's a type of coal. Yeah, it is. It's under corporations. Okay, also, the other corporation is the Hepburn Act. And you want to remember the Hepburn Act in 1906 because it broke up and it regulated the railroads. That's all you need to know. Regulated the railroads. The Hepburn Act. And again, this is all under TR. Okay. National parks. Remember, that is under conservation. Twice as many. And the Newlands Reclamation Act, which means the Newlands Act is a great example of what we do now with irrigation. So if someone bought land that was not very well irrigated, then what TR would do is say, if you improve it, we'll give you money in order to irrigate that land. So the Newlands Act was sort of a push to go west and in land that probably wasn't all that favorable. Okay. Now, the Panic of 1907. This is a kind of a different panic. Remember, this is the panic when TR says, I'm not going to run again. They called it the Roosevelt panic. Okay? So, the panic where it's all right. The panic where Roosevelt says he's not going to run again. Also, this is the panic when all these corporations are being broken up. It's causing a lot of financial turmoil because of the breakup of the trusts. Okay, so it's called the Panic of 1907 or the Roosevelt Panic. They sometimes name it after him. All right, breakup of Standard Oil. He breaks up Standard Oil. He breaks up one of the first ones is he breaks up the Northern Securities Company, which is a railroad. Okay. Now, a couple of things you might want to know. First of all, you want to know that the Bull Moose Party. So he goes away, comes back. Bull Moose Party is the third party. It is the most, of all of the parties, it is the most important of the third parties because it gets the most votes. Now, this is the time when the party, like the party masters, still decide who's going to represent the party. So the party bosses go with Taft. So Roosevelt starts a third party called the Bull Moose Party, or the Progressive Party. Okay? So he wants all those things, like votes for women. He wants, all those things that we would consider progressive. Okay? And he runs as a third party. He gets the most votes of any third party in history. But he still doesn't win. So remember, this is the election. It goes Taft divided by Roosevelt equals Wilson. Remember the political cartoon. Okay? Now, who else runs? Is Eugene Debs. A socialist. Okay. And he is going to be part of that another party. Now, he obviously doesn't, I think he gets 1 million votes or something, but it's still formidable. It's still someone that you want to remember who that is. All right, so Roosevelt. So if I'm going to ask you, what are the three progressive presidents? It's TR, Taft, and the first term of Wilson. Okay? So, under Wilson, Wilson is still considered a progressive. His first term is progressive. He passes the Underwood Tariff, which lowers the tariff. And remember, in order to lower the tariff, you have to make up the money elsewhere. Where are you going to make it up? The income tax, which is the 16th Amendment. Okay. He also creates the Federal Reserve. And remember, that kind of takes the place of the Bank of the United States. It divides the country into Federal Reserve districts, which we still have today, and they regulate all the banks in their areas. Okay, so we want to remember that. The Federal Reserve. He takes that. Remember, he's got the triple wall. What are the triple walls? Tariffs, banks, and trusts. So he too is going to be a trust buster. He too, he's going to do the banks. He's going to break down these big walls of the banks and make them accountable to every single district as the Federal Reserves. He is also going to create the Clayton Antitrust Act. Remember, that's going to replace the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act is the one that had the loopholes that unions could be looked at as monopolies. So this one gets rid of all the loopholes, and that is his thing. So that's how he deals with trusts. Okay, he also does a couple of other things. He does a Child Labor Act in 1916. Notice it's all before we get involved in World War I. So he breaks up and says children are not going to go into the labor force. So he breaks up that. He also gives loans to, called the Warehouse Act, which is on the green thing. I'm not sure you're going to need to know that, but just so you know, he gives loans to farmers, trying to get people again to move west. And
what year was the Clayton Antitrust Act?
it's all about the same time. I think it's 1914. I think is the Clayton Antitrust. Is it 15? I don't know, somewhere around there. And then the Adamson Act, which is another regulatory act that says all people are going to work only 8 hours, and that would be in the train industry or in the railroads. So 8-hour day, and you have to be paid overtime. Remember, this was a time when you didn't have to be paid overtime. Interstate, right, correct. Because remember, if you're the federal government, you don't regulate state things, you regulate interstate, meaning among different states. Okay, so that's the Adamson Act. Okay, I'm going to flip the page in case you're following. Okay, now, maybe I am. Okay, so remember, before World War I starts, we have a draft. And the draft is the first draft. And what's another word for draft? Conscription. So if you see something about conscription versus draft, they're the same things. And the draft is going to be an issue bigger in the big cities. Remember, they're going to have draft riots because it's going to be a draft that unequally takes people that are poor. Okay, so draft is going to happen. You cannot pay to get out of the draft. This is the first war you can't pay to get out of it. Conscription and draft are the same thing. Oh, bounty jumper. Yeah, that's a person that would go and get money from all the different ones. Okay, so a couple of Supreme Court cases you might need to know. Number one, you might need to know Schneck versus the U.S., which is S-C-H-E-N-C-K. S-C-H-E-N-C-K versus the U.S. Just write it, and you can look at your green sheet when you get home. And what that basically says is that if you commit espionage or you spy for the bad guys, you can be put in jail. Now, who was this aimed at? The socialist. Sorry, the socialist. At Eugene Debs. Yeah. Okay, so, and the other thing that was passed in 1919 was Atkins versus Children's Hospital. Because women get the right to vote, so they take away their special status, which was Muller versus Oregon. Good. So it's Muller versus Oregon versus Atkins versus Children's Hospital. Okay. And Atkins versus Children's Hospital is a little bit later, like 1923, but it's Atkins, A-T-A. Sorry? Oh, it takes away the special privilege of women in the workforce. Because now they're equal, so they don't need protection. Wait, what?
I'm just thinking if that hadn't been children's hospital, they wouldn't have any pay.
Maybe. Megan. Muller versus Oregon was much used earlier. Yeah. Atkins versus Children's Hospital gets rid of Muller versus Oregon. So women don't have special status now. Okay, so we enter World War I. Okay, stop. Okay, triple alliance is what? Triple alliance are the Central Powers, right. Triple Entente are the Allies, right. There you go. Okay, please make sure you remember that, because I saw that so much on the test when you guys took that everybody got. Think of Entente is French. Entente is French. It's not German foreign. It's French. Entente. Okay. Now, Wilson is elected again. He is elected by saying he kept us out of war. And, of course, he goes immediately into, we have to make the world safe for democracy. All right. So, what I suggest you do is go back over, too, to review World War I. Remember your test? Go back over your test and review those things. Okay, so a couple things you want to remember. Russia leads the the Allies, the Triple Entente, in order to have their own revolution. So the United States comes in as a result of that because they don't want to be aligned with a colonized. Okay. So once they leave. So a couple of reasons we go in. Number one, the Zimmerman note, where the German guy writes to the Mexican guy and says, you know what, if you attack the United States, guess what? We will get your Mexican cession area back. Okay? The Lusitania, maybe, kinda, because Americans were killed on that ship, even though that ship was British. Okay. Another reason is our close alliance with England. We are much closer with England, and the Germans are shooting our merchant ships with their U-boats, so we are much more aligned with the Allies. Okay, so what do you want to remember? Home stuff. You don't want to remember all the battles. Nobody cares. So what are the home things you need to know? George Creel. George Creel, you've got to know that guy. George Creel is the one that is going to Committee of Public Information. And he is the one that's going to talk us into the war because he's going to make all the posters. He's going to do all the cool stuff to make us feel like we need to be, fighting the war. It's the 4 Minute Men. Yes, 4 Minute Men. Okay, then you're going to have Mr. Baruch. And he is going to do it. You guys missed these a bunch, so make sure you know them. Mr. Baruch was doing the War Industries Board, where he is making sure that we turn car factories into, tank factories. And we are making war materials. Okay, you want to remember him. B-A-R-U-C-H, Baruch. Okay? All right, so you want to remember, and you want to remember the third guy, which is Herbert Hoover, who does the victory gardens and the voluntary rationing, like wheatless Mondays, fuelless Wednesdays, okay? Meatless whatever day. Okay? So you want to remember that they do that. Okay. Now, all right, so the IWW during World War I is the Wobblies, or the Industrial Workers of the World, or the International Workers of the World. They're all known by both those. And the I Won't Work. They are the anti-war people. And they're the ones that are the target of the Espionage Act. And so they want to keep people from signing up for the draft. They want to make sure that people don't involve themselves in war, and they are the target. That's how Eugene Debs goes into jail, is under the Espionage Act. Okay, now, during the war, there's a couple of things that happen that you need to know. Number one, blacks go to the north to find factory jobs, and that is where there's a number of race riots, especially in places like Detroit. Blacks also go into the service. Most of them don't see fighting, but they go to Europe. Many of them stay in France because they're treated better there. Now, if you're going to answer a question about, and always think ethnicities and women when you're answering questions, because that's what they want to see. They want to see that you know more than just what white men are doing. They want to know that you know all the different aspects of the war. So if you're doing, what are women doing? Women are going into the workforce. Women are participating for the first time. This gives them the right to vote. This is why Wilson says they helped. So what are blacks doing? Blacks are going to the military. They're going north, quiet, and they're going all kinds of places in order to get jobs. Then, after the war, they're going to do what we call the Great Migration, which leads to the Harlem Renaissance. Okay? So think of it as a story. Don't just think, okay, I've got my flashcard here. I know exactly what that means. It's not going to be enough. Not going to be enough. When you answer these questions, they're going to expect you to understand the importance of them. That's the way the questions are always worded. Okay, now, I really think, for the most part, that's all you need to know about World War I. Because really, we're in it 9 months. Where it's more important that you know the so what of it. Well, when we come back, we have this huge flu epidemic where millions die from the flu. And women go back home. Most of them do not continue in the workforce. It's the 1920s. Yeah. Okay, so what does, bless you. Now, what does Wilson do? And remember, now we're going to be talking about the big four. Big three for World War II, big four for World War I. Just like you're counting down, 4, 3. Okay, so the big four: Italy, U.S., Britain, and France. Remember, Italy's the one they can't decide which side they want to be on. Okay, so they all end up in the party in Paris. Remember, this is going to be the Treaty of Versailles. Wilson goes in with his 14 points. Which is the one he really wants? League of Nations. What's the sticking point? Article X, the entangling alliance. Okay, what do they come out with? They come out with a treaty that blames Germany. Do you want me to stay in one place?
Yeah,
Is it
it's
helpful?
easier.
Okay, sorry. I won't walk. I've been trying not to, but every once in a while I just have to. Okay, so League of Nations is what Wilson gets out of it. Pretty much all the other is blaming Germany. It means we blame Germany, we make them pay for it. It's going to be a step toward World War II. Now, when the United States is finished with World War I in our little 9-month stint, we come back and we are isolated. Okay, don't forget that part. Think, okay, we put our little toe in the alliances and all that, and ew. So we pull it back and we do our own party for 10 years. Okay, so think about that. Think about the story. So what happens? Women, and many of you on your essays forgot that whole thing that women got the right to vote, which kind of leads to women having a whole new kind of persona. Not all women. So if you were writing an essay, you would say, well, the women in the countryside continued on the same way. Remember, most people, even in the 1920s, in the countryside didn't even have electricity. And they did not drink much. They were the ones who were kind of followed the law, where the ones in the city didn't follow the law. They had the speakeasies, they had the short dresses, they had the bobbed hair. They, talked about sex. They drank, they smoked. They tried to be like men. They even, got the clothes and bound their breasts and did all that just to look like men and to have the same privileges, whatever that was. Okay, so now when Mr. Wilson comes home to try to get that treaty passed, remember, he doesn't really care about the other. He wants the League of Nations. Who is he greeted with? Henry Cabot Lodge, who is a reservationalist, who says, you are going to get rid of that Article X. Then there are the irreconcilables, like Hiram Johnson and Mr. Bora from Idaho, who say, I don't care what you do to that treaty, I'm not signing it. So we have the Republicans who don't want it, the Democrats are kind of divided on it, and he never ends up getting it signed because he is too inflexible and basically has a stroke, tries to get people to pressure their senators, has a stroke, his wife runs the country, and then he gives the solemn referendum, which he says, in 1920, if you guys want that, that belong to the League of Nations, vote Democrat. And what do they vote? Republican. That's Harding. Okay? Do you guys get that little scenario? Tell yourself the story when you look at this. Look at the green thing and tell yourself the story. All right. So out of World War I, we're going to isolate ourselves, and we're very nervous about socialist and fascist. So we are going to have a purifying time, which is to have the Red Scare, the Palmer raids. Okay, we have two different groups. We're going to have the Palmer raids, which was under Mr. Palmer in the 1920s. Later on, we're going to have the 1950s with MacArthur. Okay, so we have two, one in the 20s and one in the 50s, two raids against communism, fascist, anarchist, that sort of thing. Those crazy people from Eastern Europe. Yes?
Who was the one in 1920?
Mitchell Palmer. Mr. Palmer. So if it says Palmer raids in your question, you know it's about the 1920s. If it says McCarthy, you know it's about the 1950s. Okay. All right. So, all right, let me find my place here. I want to find my place. All right, so let's talk about the 1920s. All right, 1920s, we have three presidents. They're all Republicans, and they're all laissez-faire, just like the Gilded Age. All Republicans, all laissez-faire. Means hands-off economy. So, Harding is first. I'm just going to give a little rundown on Harding. Remember, Harding is the first time women could vote, and not that many women voted. So, we don't know quite why that is, but they didn't vote at the high level we thought maybe they would. But Harding was attractive, so the ones that did vote voted for Harding. So, he didn't last very long. He died of a mysterious disease. Probably the wife. No. Oh no, he got poisoned. Okay. So, what do we want to remember about him? He was a bad president. And scandals. The Teapot Dome. Okay, Teapot Dome is when one of his little cronies tried to sell, well, did sell, government property, government oil property to a private owner. Okay, so you want to remember that. There was also a very high protective tariff called the Fortney-McCumber tariff, and it's in your thing here. The Fortney, and even if you don't remember the name, just remember it's in the 1920s. It's very high tariff. Now, what's that going to do? That's going to make every other country have a very high tariff. Okay? Because if we're not going to want to trade with them, they're not going to want to trade with us. So it's going to then isolate us even further. Okay, you guys got that? So think of the 20s with a big wall around us. We don't want to know what's going on around outside. We're going to have our little party here. Okay. We also are under the influence of this new lost generation literature. Don't forget, this is the literature of depression, sort of like it's not, life isn't worth living, why are we doing this? So it's people like F. Scott Fitzgerald, it's like Sinclair Lewis, and again, you don't need to know them all, Ernest Hemingway, and T.S. Eliot. That those are kind of the, and again, do you need to know them all? No, but you need to kind of have an idea. Okay, I want to remember that Hemingway is the 1920s. Well, he also fought, he was an ambulance driver in World War I, so maybe you can remember that, maybe not. But just remember the idea that this is the lost generation literature, even though we did not lose a generation. Okay, KKK, rise of the KKK in the 1920s because the blacks have gone up and had a Harlem Renaissance, and the whites in the South are very jealous of that. Do not like the power that blacks are getting, nor the publicity. So the rise is the highest point of the KKK. This is also the rise of jazz. That is unique American music. Starts in New Orleans, finds its way up to Chicago and New York, and this is the time that when people think it's cool to be a black jazz singer. And it is, when the Negro was in vogue, the whole idea of Langston Hughes, Zora Hurston, those are the big particular people you want to remember. Also, you want to remember this is also the time of immigration, squeezing immigration. We do not want immigrants because we are building our walls and we don't want socialists. Yes, the political cartoon where they have the big end that talks about immigrants coming in, and then they're only allowed a few of them to come in.
It's like a funnel.
A funnel, exactly.
Another one where it's like America and the 68.
Yes, that's the one, yeah.
And in that cartoon, isn't it the same kind of just like cutting off the end?
Yes, not allowing, and it says like 2% or 4% on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The immigrants are already invested.
Correct, correct. Okay, don't get distracted, please. Christian?
Is there a law in like the 20s and 24 or something that reduces the immigration?
Yeah, it's the Immigration Emergency Act.
And that was in the 20s.
That was in the 20s. Just remember in 1921, I think it was, or 22.
Okay.
Yeah, Megan? Teapot Dome is when people in Harding's cabinet sold government oil fields to private people. Okay, so what else do we need to remember? You guys, come on. Just because I'm not talking doesn't mean you need to start. Sacco-Vanzetti trial. Don't forget, there are two trials that you need to know in the 1920s. One, Sacco-Vanzetti, and they were accused of killing someone. They were found guilty and put in the old Sparky. And It was because they didn't speak English, it was because they were anarchists, and it was because they had circumstantial evidence. It was easy to blame them. Okay, the other trial you need to know is the Scopes trial, showing religion versus science. And so what of that is that eventually it just kind of, the idea of teaching evolution, it became more mainstream, even though he was found guilty. What it really did is it showed this conflict between religion and science. Okay. All right, Sigmund Freud, the idea that everything is about sex, added to the fervor of the 1920s and the more openness about that in that generation. Not the older generation. Remember, their parents would have been the Victorian period. They would have had everything covered up and even the legs of the table. So that was their parents, and these were the flappers and the young men that took advantage of that. So we have the whole, and this is also the beginning of the rise of cars. So they called it the passion pit. So you have the talk about sex, you've got the car, you've got women more independent. Ooh, recipe for disaster. Okay. The passion pit, yes. Yeah. Okay. Jazz singer in the 1920s, the first talking film. Talking with Rudolph Valentino. Okay. Margaret Sanger, birth control. It all goes together, doesn't it? Okay. And the Harlem Renaissance we were talking about. Marcus Garvey in the 1920s, the Back to Africa. It wasn't all that successful, about 1,000 went back to it, but it's all about black nationalism. Okay? The idea of blacks feeling better about their whole culture and being, and Marcus Garvey kind of saying, well, let's go back to our roots. For most people, they didn't know anybody in Africa. All right, also you want to remember Charles Lindbergh. This was the time of the heroes. There's more leisure time now that you've got transportation, and the jobs are taking less of your time, so there's more leisure time. So you've got people like Babe Ruth, you've got Charles Lindbergh, you've got these sports heroes, boxing and wrestling and things like that come into this time period as sort of important heroes. Okay? Yeah.
But most of it's public transportation. Because remember when they went on the race
riots? Yeah. Well, a lot of it is public transportation from your home that might be outside the city into the city. It also could be cars too. Yeah. Cars are, by the 1920s, almost everybody has a car. By the end of the 1920s. It's like the radio. Radio and cars should kind of go together, you guys. Just think, there's a radio in your car. I hope. Maybe not anymore. I don't know. No. Radio is mainstream by 1930. It's not, it's the TV that I was talking about. Remember I said, do not mix up TVs and radios. TV comes about 1950. Yeah, but that is, they don't lead to each other. Okay, here we go. All right, so what's happening in 1920s foreign policy-wise? Okay, there's all kinds of problems on trying to, and the theme of the 1920s foreign policy is we don't participate. Because we don't want anything to do with what's going on. Dana, don't mess around. So there are 5 power treaties that are trying to keep who militarily small? Japan. They've already taken care of Germany. Remember, we've already taken care of Germany with the treaty. Now it's Japan that we're going to take care of in these 5 power treaties. Yes. Yes, and there was a 9 power. You don't need to, you know what, if you were to remember that, it would just clog up your head. So what you want to remember is all those treaties are to establish less destroyers, less ships for Japan than for America and Britain. And that's all you need to remember. Just remember, it's trying to decrease military for them. Yes. Okay, so now we have the Hoover administration. Remember, we have Coolidge, which did nothing. Remember? The silent cow. The whole thing he said was what America is supposed to be about is business. I need an act. Just remember, he owes an act more than any other president. Okay. Yes, good. Well, yeah, he was born 4th of July. That could be a good question. Okay, so Hoover. Hoover has, I know, I saw it. Hoover has the distinct displeasure of being president when the Great Depression ended. So when we think of the Great Depression, or started. So when we think about what were the causes of the Great Depression, and really for Hoover, you need to know this is a guy who was very successful with his food administration. He has the idea, this is, we're going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. I will help banks, I will help industries, I will not help the individual because they're responsible for themselves. So get a grip. Okay? So what he does is he is, unfortunately, just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So let's talk about the reasons that we have all of these problems. Number one, people are buying way too much on credit. They aren't paying enough down, they're not paying enough back. The bank is really devoid of money because they've loaned it all out. We have people buying stocks on credit, which is called buying on margin. We have a lot of people that don't own anything, and a few people who own everything. We call it distribution of wealth, which means those wealthy people have way too much control. Okay? Also, the fact is that there weren't any no safety nets at all. So when the banks ran out of money, they just went under. Okay? So everything was kind of built on, on sand. It really wasn't built on any foundations. So when the institution started to go under, it was a problem. Okay. Oh, and also, the farmers are starting to have help. Now, they're starting to have problems. The farmers in the early 1930s start to have this drought. Okay, remember, the farmers are going to have the drought and the Dust Bowl. It is not definite, it's not related necessarily to the Great Depression because they didn't have anything to do with the stock market. Most of them didn't have a lot of debt that way, but they had a lot of debt because they had made tons of money on feeding Europe during World War I. Well, the drought is over at the end of World War I, so they're not going to feed Europe anymore. So they're going to have all of this surplus, and the price of their crops is going to go way down. And so they bought all these new tractors and all this new stuff, and now all of a sudden they don't have any money to pay it back. Okay? So it's related in that the whole economy is a problem, but it's not one of the causes of the Great Depression, the farmers. It's kind of just a sign. Okay, now, what's happened is that in October of 1929, everything just kind of comes to a head and crashes. Okay, so 1929. In 1932, there's a new election. Hoover tries to run again. I don't know why you would want to, but FDR runs against him and promises a New Deal. Promises a New Deal and says, and by the way, many of you totally blew that cartoon that I just gave on a test that I'll get back to you on Monday, is that you have the guy looking, Uncle Sam is waiting, he's the sick one, and FDR is coming in and saying to Congress, we might have to try a couple of different ways. And you guys, I don't know why you couldn't interpret it, it seems simple to me, but the idea that, you know what, if these all don't work, I'll try more. And that every time, what he said when he ran in 1932 was, you know what, if these don't work, I'll keep trying until I find something that does work. And that's the importance of FDR. He tried everything. Even if the things didn't work, he tried other things. Okay? So he was willing to throw all of the programs at it. Remember, those are all called alphabet programs. All right, so let's talk about what some of those things are. Remember, he has the 3 R's. Relief, recovery, and reform. Boy, some of you didn't know those. Woo, you have some interesting ones. Reference. Very, very scary. I don't know. I don't want to know. All right, so the first thing he does, he gets rid of prohibition. He says, you know what, we all need to drink. So he gets rid of prohibition, and he passes the 21st Amendment. All right, now remember, Eleanor Roosevelt is particularly important because he has polio, so he has to be his legs and his eyes and go around the country to find out what's going on. So she is the one who really does report about all the poverty. Yes?
On the test, what were you looking for specifically? Like you said,
Marian Anderson with civil rights, and her with going with Dorothea Lange to go to all the places to take pictures and to find out what's going on. I think did I ask her 2 things?
Yeah.
3? Then what else could it be? What else did she do? No. Okay, let's talk about it later. I don't want to get involved in this. Yeah. Yeah, probably she would. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the important programs. The AAA, which is part of the first New Deal. The Agricultural Adjustment Act, which was found to be unconstitutional because it had people doing killing pigs and trying to keep the price of stuff up, paying people not to raise things. So we call that a subsidy, which was not cool in the 1930s. So they found that unconstitutional.
Thousands of pigs were being slaughtered and not being made into bacon.
That's right, and everybody loves bacon. All right, Tennessee Valley Authority. Yes.
How are subsidies legal now?
Because we don't interpret the Constitution the same anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, different time.
So they could find like all the, if someone were to say that the subsidies we have now are found at.
Yeah, a lot of people say they are.
Then they just get.
Yeah, they just, the farms, the difference is today, the people who represent the farmers are a lot more powerful than they were then. Okay, next one, CCC, yeah.
Was FDR Republican or Democrat?
Democrat. Oh, all the way. Yeah, totally Democrat. In fact, he's going to change the way blacks vote. Remember, this is when they start to vote Democrat. Because some of the programs were, they thought maybe some would help. I don't know how many they did. CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. Corps. Remember, the corpse is the... So, all right. So, no, it's pronounced Corps. We can talk later. Okay, Civilian Conservation Corps is the one that took young men, put them out to work on conservation programs and things like digging trees and working in nature so that they could do good works without being a burden on their families. Okay, and that was probably the most popular of all the programs. So if you were to actually pick a program, that would be a good one to write about. Okay, the NRA, CCC. The NRA was found to be unconstitutional. Remember, the symbol for that was the blue eagle. That was the one that was supposed to have a certain quota of items that were supposed to be produced every day, and they found that unconstitutional because it was too much controlled by the federal executive branch.
You answered it.
Okay. All right, next one you want to remember is you want to remember the PWA and the WPA. Both of them were big projects. So if you wanted to give an example, by the way, if you get an essay question about something where you can give an example of Larrabee Stadium or the auditorium or the murals that were done in the post office, you can do that. You can give examples from your local community. So if you wanted to give examples from that, you could use that. The WPA or the PWA, either one, both of them, or WPA is the more popular of the two. Okay? So you can use that. All right. Also, you want to remember things that are permanent, like the Social Security Act, the SSA, Social Security Agency, which provided money for people that were too poor or people that were dependents that didn't have any way of making money. If they were children of somebody had died, they were supposed to get money to help, or they were too old to work. Also, the Social Security and Exchange Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and that is the group that oversaw the stock market, so we wouldn't have a problem again with the stock market. The other one I want you to remember is FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Okay, that's the FDIC that says your money is guaranteed by, for a certain amount of money, $5,000 then. It is secured by the federal government. So it got people to be able to give money or to reinvest their money. Okay.
What was the one that oversaw the stock market?
The Securities and Exchange Commission. Yeah. Okay. All right. So you want to remember the 3 people that did not support it. Huey Long, who was the socialist, called Share the Wealth. He is the one that promised everybody $5,000 and a radio and low-cost loans for a house. He had a huge following, He was the governor of Louisiana, and he was assassinated. And FDR called him the most dangerous man in the world. Yeah. Okay, next one. You want to remember Father Coughlin? Father Coughlin was the guy that got on the radio and blamed the Jews for the Great Depression, and they finally pulled him out. He was a Catholic priest, pulled him off the radio. Yeah, televangelist, but he really did use the Jews as the scapegoat. The third one is the Charles Townsend. He was the old doctor. Mr. Townsend was the old doctor who said if you give every old person $200 a month and make them spend it, that will end the Great Depression. Okay, now, those are the three people that were critics. You also want to remember Keynes, Keynesian economics, K-E-Y-N-E-S. I've seen questions about this a lot of times on tests. Keynesian economics, he was a British economist who said if you put tons of money into these programs, it will end the Depression. So the question is, did Roosevelt put too much money in or not enough money? Or would it have eventually worked had we not had World War II? We don't know. But we do know that these programs did not end the Depression. They lessened it for some people, but did not solve the problems of the Great Depression. Okay, so don't forget Keynesian economics. I feel like there's somebody behind me. Okay. All right, so what does Roosevelt do that makes him unpopular? Court packing. Besides the New Deal, and some people were very suspicious of all this government intervention. That would be Republicans. So, he did the court packing where he was going to he proposed to put a new justice in for everybody over 70 that hadn't retired. So, that was not popular because that was messing with the Constitution. Okay, now, World War II. So, Pearl Harbor, remember, we have, in the 1930s, we don't go to the London conference because we don't want to get involved in any of the money problems of international currency. We're going to stay our own deal. We're going to do our own solve. So we've got all of our walls up. Well, then, of course, Hitler does his thing. And then finally, that's how I tell that part of history. Hitler does his thing. And so what we say, FDR says, okay, we're even going to isolate ourselves more. We're going to be the good neighbor. We're going to take all of our army out of South America. We're going to just stay in our little, special place, and we're going to solve our own problems. So he takes all the military out of South America and says we're a good neighbor. All right. Also, the Nye Committee finds out, by the way, you guys all need to know about the Nye Committee, even though many of you don't know about it. Nye Committee said, they had just come out with their report right at the end of the 1930s. And it said, the only people that benefited from World War I were the bankers and the merchants. And everybody else lost, but we had World War I because these two groups wanted war. So it was a downer on getting involved. That's what I just said. It's a Nye report.
The only people that benefited from
Merchants
were bankers.
and bankers. All right, so,
From World War I.
yeah. All right, so by this time, everybody has a radio. They're listening to the fireside chats. They're listening to FDR telling them it's going to be okay. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And then, of course, Pearl Harbor hits. So what do? First of all, Spain is having their civil war. They don't get involved. Remember, that's the drawing, the painting of Picasso, Guernica. So we know they're not involved. They're not going to be involved, even though people from the United States, many of them went to help the Spanish. Okay.
What year was Pearl Harbor? Was that 42?
41.
41.
December 41. Okay. December 7th.
1941. 1776.
Okay. All right. So, what a couple of things you want to remember. The Panay incident. You guys, unless you know this stuff, in which case you should be out partying somewhere. Okay. The Panay incident. And remember, one of the things I want you to remember is we got involved in war with Japan for a number of reasons. It built up because, number one, the Panay incident in China. Many of you don't know it. It was the American ship that was bombed by the Japanese, and they were checking to see what we would do. we took the money, they said, we're sorry, and nothing happened. So they said, hey, nothing will happen when we bomb Pearl Harbor, I guess. But the United States withdrew money and, not money, but oil reserves because Japan was starting to imperialize into Manchuria and wouldn't leave. So we cut their oil supply, then they attacked Pearl Harbor. Okay, so it goes in that order. The Panay, the oil, and then Pearl Harbor. All right, now, he gives his quarantine speech, FDR does. And his quarantine speech is in 37 and says, by the way, this is going back a bit. The quarantine speech says, hey, that is a bad country there, that Japan thing. And we should quarantine them. We should put them in the corner and not do anything with them. We should not trade with them. We should just pretend like they're dead. Like LBJ. So what the people said is the people that were against getting involved, they said, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be saying anything. You said you were neutral. You are now taking an approach, and we don't like that. And Charles Lindbergh was one of those people that didn't want to get involved. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we wanted them in the corner. Okay. Now, I don't think the name of the committee that Charles Lindbergh was called, it was called America First. Remember? I want you to know that. America First. That was the isolationist group. And Charles Lindbergh was the center of that. Okay, and the other one was a long committee, and I have to read it. Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies. I don't know why you have to think of something so hard. But anyway, so there were two groups. Yeah, aiding. Okay, so what do we need to know? First of all, I can go through part of these. We're going to be the arsenal for democracy. We finally, after Pearl Harbor, and I think the things that you need to know are a couple things. We helped the Allies in a number of ways. We did before we got involved. Lend-lease. We lent them things, or they could lease it, but they had to bring their own ships and bring us money. We weren't going to give anybody credit. Destroyers for bases. We would give them destroyers, but they gave us bases in North America that the British had. Okay, so those are two important ways that we helped the Allies before we got involved in the war. We said we were neutral, but not really. I mean, we did these things to help the Allies. All right, so let's talk about domestic things. So after Pearl Harbor, we have the Japanese internment camps that takes all the Japanese, 120,000 of them, takes them from the coast inland to keep them. And remember, Korematsu versus the U.S., and they said, yes, in time of war, you can do these things. Zoot suit riots down here in Los Angeles because of the zoot suits were being worn. People were angry because they were using all that material, but it wasn't just that. It was also stress between two groups of people. You had the military, and you had these people that were trying to sort of become part of the culture, and the sailors weren't used to any other cultures, so it became friction in a wartime society. Okay. Let's see what else you need to know. All right, who were the big three? Oh my gosh, so many of you missed this. Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. No, somebody put Mussolini, somebody put Hitler.
Oh my God.
Okay. All right. So, what do you need to know? You need to know a couple of things. First of all, there were all of these, again, there was a draft. There was a draft. And again, one of the things about the draft that you need to know is that everybody was drafted. But they were all in segregated units. Remember, at the end of World War II is when segregation in the military ends. Okay, so many of you do not know who Philip Randolph. You guys need to listen who Philip Randolph is. Many of you missed this one on the test. Philip Randolph is the black man who said to Roosevelt, if you don't give blacks equal opportunity to industry jobs, we're going to march on Washington. So what Roosevelt said is, okay, I will give blacks equal access to federal jobs in the war industries for it. So this is a big deal. because now blacks are going to be able to get better jobs, and the March on Washington didn't happen, at least at that point. And that was, nobody needed anything going on in World War II that had anything to do with marching or strikes or any of that kind of thing. Okay, couple things. You want to remember about the three conferences, the Tehran, the Yalta, and yeah, Potsdam and Casablanca. I guess there are 4 of them. Okay, so Casablanca,
D-Day.
D-Day. Yes, they planned D-Day.
What year?
No.
Close.
Okay. Casablanca is in Africa. Morocco. Okay, Yalta. Yalta is the one that we talked about. That Yalta is the one, oh, I guess we were doing them in order. I can't remember right now. Why can I not remember? Tehran is it Yalta next? No, it's Potsdam next. No, it's Tehran. Look them up. Yeah, is it in order here? Yeah. Okay. You guys look those up. I don't want to talk about them. What?
It was the one that they were gonna say what was gonna happen after the war.
Yeah, I know it is, but I can't remember all of the aspects of it, so my head hurts, I don't remember. Okay, you guys look at those, don't start talking. Okay, look those up, make sure you know them. Okay, so, World War I ends, World War II ends. Woo. World War II ends. So, what's the result of World War II? You gotta know them. This is the more important part. Okay, ends the Depression. In number 2, the men get the GI Bill, which is so important because it gives men an opportunity to go back to school. This is when the Cal States and the UC start. It also gives them an opportunity to buy a house cheaply, hence Levittown, all of the housing, okay? And the baby boom. Me. So, the baby boom, all those babies, 1 every 17 seconds, or 7 seconds, or ridiculous. So, the baby boom comes after that. So, we have a lot, and most people did not go back to the farm. They went back and they took factory jobs. Okay? So, there's a population movement after World War II. And if you remember that map I showed you, we talked about it, you have people from the South, a lot of them going to California, a lot of them going to Detroit and some of the factory work because it's going to be Cold War factories now. All right, so let's talk about that. Stalin, what's he do? Right after World War II, he starts to portion out his little area, his sphere of influence, and Churchill calls it the Iron Curtain. Okay, he starts to do that. We are very suspicious of what he's trying to do, and so we drop the atomic bomb, and 2 of them, and then how he counters is he tries to blockade the city of Berlin and to starve the Western people out. It doesn't work, so now we start the Cold War. Now, there's a number of things you need to know about the Cold War, and don't forget, it's when the United States goes against the Soviet Union, but not directly, through other countries. So even though the Berlin crisis, the airlift, it's not directly because we fly in direct things. If it had been, Stalin had shot planes down, then it would be not a Cold War, but he didn't. So we fought through Berlin, and they gave up. Okay, the first real confrontation is going to be really Korea. But before that, Truman, who is president, comes up with the Truman Doctrine. And the Truman Doctrine says, any country that is willing to fight communism, we will give money to. Especially you, Turkey, and you, Greece. Okay? And the Marshall Plan, now there's 2 big plans. The Marshall Plan says, we will rebuild Europe. All you have to do is let us give you money, and now you are in debt to us by making sure that you're strong enough not to become communist. So the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan. Okay, you've got to know those 2 things. Okay. All right, got it?
I think so.
All right. Now, China falls to communism in 1949. 1949. Communism China's going to become communist. Remember the two leaders? Mao and Chiang Kai-shek. Mao and Chiang Kai-shek. And of course, Red China, it becomes communist, so Chiang Kai-shek has to go where? Taiwan. Right. Okay. Now, NATO is created, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is the group that is anti-communist. The alternate group, the one that is the communist group, is called the Warsaw Pact. So we have NATO and the Warsaw Pact. They don't like each other. So Warsaw Pact are all the communist countries, including the satellites. And then you have the NATO, which is really the Atlantic countries plus the United States and Canada. Communist. Yeah. Okay. All right. I know. Sorry. All right. Korean War, 1950 to 53. Okay. Don't forget, it divides Korea in half. North Korea is communist. Always the North is communist. Always, always, always. And the South is Democratic. Okay? Same thing. All right. So this is when MacArthur gets fired. Okay? This is also when it stays divided. And we don't use the bomb. And this is when we realize that we're going to have to redefine the idea of success. Is success going to be to wipe out? No. It's going to be to contain communism. Remember, containment comes first, then the domino theory. Okay? So we're going to contain it first. Later on in Vietnam, we're worried about the domino theory, the idea that it's all going to go down. Okay? All right. 1950 to 53. Ryan looks like he's such a... Okay. So, who is the president of Stalin dies? Who becomes the president of Russia? Khrushchev. Okay. Khrushchev is going to go through... He's going to go through Truman, part of Truman, Eisenhower. He's going to go through Kennedy, and then Johnson. At the end of Johnson, when we go into, who's after Johnson?
Nixon.
Nixon. Nixon is going to be Gorbachev. Truman. Okay. All right. You know what? Let me ask you this. The rest of this, can you remember the rest of this? Yes. You're all looking very, no. You're looking anxious, like you're hyper. So let me ask you this. I really think the rest of this is current enough for you to really remember most of it. But wait. I know it's 5 o'clock, but this is, I want to answer any questions you might have. That of something you want defined, something you want, that's still confusing to you.
What was the other plan along with the Marshall Plan?
The Truman Doctrine.
Truman Doctrine?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Nobody else? Yes, questions, Will. What's that? Marshall Plan gave money to any country that wanted it to rebuild physically Europe. And the purpose was to rebuild it strong so that it could withstand communism. Yeah. Salt. Oh, we are actually going to be talking about salt on Monday. But SALT is Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which stands for we're going to limit the number of weapons that we have. The Soviet Union. Ryan.
Oh, never mind. I'm not really talking
What was the cash and carry?
Cash and carry means if you want military stuff, you bring your money and you come and bring your own ships and take them with you. We're not coming to you. Ryan, I didn't get a question. Did you have a question?
Oh, no. It's about the salt because we're not going to be here.
Oh,
For people
yeah.
in the physics.
Oh. Okay.
All the way back to the
Yeah.
1870s, slaughterhouse cases.
What is
The
it?
slaughterhouse cases in the 1870s.
1870 slaughterhouse case. I know this.
I had no idea what they I'm looking at the practice.
Yeah. No, slaughterhouse case, 1870s. I know this.
Would you like me to read you the options?
The what?
The options.
Oh, yeah, that'd be good.
We give protections given to African Americans under the 14th Amendment. We give protections given to women under the 14th Amendment. Reverse Plessy versus Ferguson. They were concerned with the constitutionality of the Emancipation proclamation related to Port registry.
No, I think it's A, isn't it?
I don't know.
That's probably what she has.
I think it's A.
Related to the APUSH civil rights cases.
Yeah, I think it's A. Yeah, Son?
This wouldn't be on like any test, but Action versus Children's Hospital, why was it versus Children's Hospital? Like,
Oh, because someone was working in the children's hospital.
oh,
Yeah, it didn't have anything to do with children.
no.
It was at first place. Anybody else with a question? Yeah, Christian?
How significant are all the titles of books?
Say it again, I can't hear you.
Do we need to know like a lot of titles of books and the author?
No, I just think, because the reason I'm asking you to know them is, number one, they might ask you, I think in some of the practice questions, they have some of the authors, but also so that you can use it in an essay. And I really think if you just know two major ones, like Hemingway, people that you should be familiar with, like I would use, if I was doing something with the Gilded Age, I would just try to remember people like Mark Twain. Realism, Jack London, some realism, just so you can use it. And you should know it anyway.
I was looking in the
Like, you're gonna have to be louder because I can't hear you, they're crying up here.
I was looking in the expansion and imperialism section, and
Yeah.
there's quite a few in the West. So I guess that's okay. We'll just know a couple of them, but I don't know the time periods are like
Expansionist?
the time period like.
Okay, well, if you look at, you guys, listen to this. The Gilded Age, at the end of the Gilded Age, is when the expansionist period comes in. So you've got the expansionist period, I would say 1890s to about 1890s to 1905. And then really the progressives come in. Yeah.
Should we know like some Gulf War stuff and recent Earth stuff?
You need to know, we need to know, you need to know, all the way through, I would say, I'm going to talk about Reagan on Monday.
Okay.
And I would say, if you know Reagan, and then I'll show a little bit of the, just throw a couple of things at you, but really up to Reagan is probably all you're doing. Unless they ask you something about Clinton and his. Can you not do that? Up to Clinton, where he's doing like his impeachment? Wine and Roche. Oh, not the blue juice. Okay, anybody else? Yes, go. Sputnik is the first satellite sent up by the, and it started what? Space race. Space race. Annapolis conference was what? Oh, the Articles of Confederation. Oh, they met in Annapolis to decide to rewrite the Constitution. Then they met in Philadelphia. Nobody owns it. All right, I think we're done. All right.